won't you be my neighbor? All right, y'all. First of all, it's your girl Sherelle Unique here, aka Caramel. As you can see, I'm super pumped because I used to watch Mr. Rogers growing up as a very young kid. I used to go to school or daycare and come home and watch Mr. Rogers. I was all in it, okay? So when this movie came out, I was like, oh yes, I'm going to see it. I'll even go by myself. And that is what I did. Okay, so let me get comfortable. I got notes, y'all. So this was called A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And I thought it would be like a biopic of his life. But it was not that. Tom Hanks, who is just a freaking superstar actor, A-list actor, played Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers actually was a supporting role in this movie. The movie was actually about Lloyd Vogo. That's the character's name. Lloyd was basically loosely playing a journalist. His name was, and I don't want to pronounce the last name wrong, but Tom Junod. So the movie was loosely based off of an interview that Tom did with Mr. Rogers. So Tom, he was this journalist for Esquire, and so he got assigned to do Mr. Rogers' interview and write up an article about Mr. Rogers back in '98. And this was kind of like a punishment for Tom, because Tom was kind of one of those journalists that nobody wanted to see, because he kind of always had like some old shady stuff going on in his writings. Like, he kind of made people look bad. And so sorry, y'all see my coat. He kind of just made people look bad. And so they gave him Mr. Rogers. Like, who else but to give him Mr. Rogers? Somebody that they can't really tarnish his image. So excuse me, y'all, I am so congested. So Lloyd Vogo, aka Tom Junod, Lloyd is kind of like a broken man, and he has a lot of trauma, a lot of struggles, a lot of different things that he has gone through in his life. Sick mother, deadbeat dad, like just all kind of things he had been through, and a lot he needed to forgive. And so it was actually taking a toll on his marriage and the raising of his first child. And so then he gets assigned to do this interview with Mr. Rogers, and it's like, oh man, I'm not trying to do this. This is a joke. But he goes to do it anyway. And so he goes to see Mr. Rogers, and of course, while he's interviewing him, he's noticing like Mr. Rogers doing all the voices for the characters. He is creating the show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He is creating the songs for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And so he's really pretty much like, okay, bruh, you're a little too perfect. What's your thing? Excuse me. What's your thing? Like, what makes you tick? Who are you in real life? What's the backstory? What's your evil alter ego? And Mr. Rogers looking at him like, this is who I am. And so Tom Hanks, he really embraced the essence of Mr. Rogers. He really took it in, like, so much so that I forgot what Mr. Rogers looked like. I had to go back and look him up, because Tom just really embodied Mr. Rogers. And so Mr. Rogers kind of showed Lloyd like that this is who I really am. And he had a way of just making every person feel valuable. That was kind of like his thing of making you feel valuable. And when he spoke to you, he had a way of making you feel like you were the only person that mattered in the world. And so doing this, Lloyd was able to find his worth, self-esteem again, and he was able to reconcile his broken relationship with his dad and be able to forgive and just turn his life around. The movie was really cool. I really enjoyed it. They showed Mr. Rogers doing his episodes. And, you know, it had the trolley and the fake town and in the world of make-believe and all of that type of stuff. But they used those things that I just mentioned as a way to transition through the movie as well. So although you saw those transitions within Mr. Rogers' neighborhood on the TV show, they also used like a fake town and a fake plane and a fake trolley to transition us within Lloyd's world as well. And I thought that was so cool and so clever. Let's see. As Lloyd was interviewing Mr. Rogers, he talked about what were some things that made him upset and what he did to cope when he was upset. So Mr. Rogers, he actually would swim every day, 20 minutes a day, first thing in the morning. From what I heard in some reviews, he used to do this in the nude every morning. And he, in the movie, they talked about how sometimes he would play the deeper keys on a piano whenever he was upset. And he'd always go back to the higher pitched keys. So to show that there was a dichotomy within this man, that he wasn't perfect. Let's see. What else? So interviewing him and seeing his authenticity and seeing his kindness and he just was so genuine that it ended up just changing Lloyd's life. Let's see. I just really enjoyed this movie. I did tap out a little bit because it's not the most stimulating movie. And, you know, once I eat, I get the itis and I do be dozing off. But I woke up kind of mad that I missed a couple little tiny parts. But some of the people told me what it was when I left out. And so, anyway, let's see. What else? What's in my notes? So this prompted me, whenever I like a movie or a book, I always go and do more research on it. This prompted me to do more research. And it helped me to really realize that Mr. Rogers was an activist. And I never considered this before. He was doing stuff on TV that really, he was changing the scope of television. He would speak directly to children about their emotions. So he was teaching emotional intelligence, but he would tackle topics that other kids shows were not tackling, like divorce, war, homicide, stuff like heavy topics, but he would use it and tackle it in a way that a kid could understand, which no other kid show was doing at that time. Then there was a time, in that time, Mr. Rogers hired a black man to play the cop for his show. And this was a huge, huge thing at that time, because you didn't see black people being portrayed in such a light. In addition to that, there was a time when there were hotels who did not want black people in their pools. And Mr. Rogers, so they would pour acid or different chemicals, bleach in the pools to clean it out because black people were unclean. So during this time and during this age, Mr. Rogers actually brought the cop in to put, and they shared a kiddie pool. They put their feet in the pool on a hot day and then shared the same towel to dry off their feet. And so Mr. Rogers was doing what he wanted to do. Okay? He was doing what he wanted to do. And he was proving points, major points, but just using little tiny, small ways of doing it. He was super cool. And the black cop, it turned out that he was a gay man. Mr. Rogers found this out. At first, he was like, just keep it to yourself because, for the bigger purpose of the show. But then in that same sense, when he told him, like, I love you just the way you are, the man felt like, he said to him, like, I felt like you were talking, you've said this to me so many times, I felt like you were talking to me that time. And he said, well, I've always been talking to you. You've just now heard it. So, I mean, Mr. Rogers, he's spoken to your whole soul. He, like, really had an anointing on his life. And it was so cool to really come to that realization. I later found out that he was a minister. I did not know that. And so he felt like if he wore his uniform, then that could kind of place a barrier between the relationship he could build with the kids that he worked with. So he would wear his sweater, and his mother made majority of the sweaters that he wore. And so y'all, Mr. Rogers was bomb. And it's sad that that show would never exist or be able to exist in a climate like we have today. Sorry, I'm a little under the weather. And so, I mean, if he had existed today, we would have called him, just the blogs, media, social media, they would have called him every name in the book. And he was just a man about kindness. And that was it. One of my favorite parts of the movie was Mr. Rogers, aka Tom Hanks, on the bus with Lloyd, and the kids on the bus all started to sing "Won't You Be My Neighbor," and we was all in there about to cry. Look, eyeballs getting juicy, all that kind of stuff, y'all. It was just such a beautiful movie. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, it really shines a light on what we're missing in this world today, which is just kindness and people being genuine and people valuing the other people. And I don't know, I just loved it. It was very nostalgic. And go see A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Also, there's a movie that was prior to this, which I haven't seen, but I want to see it. It's called Won't You Be My Neighbor. So let's get into candy bars, because I am caramel, so we gotta have our candy bar rating. I give it a 5 out of 5. I loved it. I love anything though that takes me back. I love anything that takes me back, but I love this movie, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. So go check it out and learn about Mr. Rogers.